Today we're going somewhere that genuinely keeps me up at night when I research it. India. Most people know India for its color, its history, its unbelievable depth of culture. But layered underneath all of that is something much, much older. A darkness that predates most of the world's religions. And today, we're going to talk about one of the most unsettling entities in all of world folklore, not just Indian folklore, the Vetala. Now, I know some of you are already familiar with Indian ghost stories, but I want you to set aside whatever you think you know, because the Vetala is not your typical restless spirit drifting through corridors. This thing is ancient, it is intelligent, and it is patient. It doesn't haunt houses, it haunts bodies. It climbs inside the recently dead and uses them like a puppet to reach out and touch the living. They are revenant spirits, tricksters, and according to tradition, they love hanging upside down from the branches of peepal trees, waiting for someone foolish enough to walk underneath after dark. I have a story coming up in this episode about a man named Rohan who thought the weight settling onto the back of his motorcycle was just his passenger, until that passenger started whispering secrets that only a dead man could possibly know. But please, stay until the very end. After these three terrifying first-hand accounts, I'm going to break down the deep cultural and spiritual history of the Vetala, why they are considered guardians of the tantric arts, how they've been documented for thousands of years, and the very specific rules you have to follow if you ever find yourself standing in front of one. That context reframes everything. You really do not want to skip it. Before we get into that first story, a quick note. If you're the kind of person who enjoys quiet, unsettling folklore like this, the details, the atmosphere, the stories that stay with you long after the video ends, then you're already part of this channel. Subscribing just makes sure you don't miss the next one. Alright, let's get into the stories. Our first story comes from a man named Rohan, who lives on the outskirts of Pune. And if you've ever been to a city like Pune or Bangalore or Hyderabad, you'll know exactly what I mean when I say that rapid urbanization in India creates these wild, almost surreal boundaries. You can be standing in front of a glass and steel apartment tower and take 3 steps to the left and find yourself at the edge of forest that hasn't been touched in centuries. That tension between the modern world and something far older is everywhere. Rohan worked late shifts at a call center, which meant he was clocking out at around 3 in the morning. His usual route home ran along a well-lit highway, but on this particular Tuesday in October, there had been a major accident. The police were redirecting traffic into a long, miserable queue, and Rohan, tired, impatient, just wanting his bed, remembered a shortcut. A narrow paved road that cut directly through a dense patch of forest land and came out near his neighborhood. He'd used it once or twice before, always in daylight. It was fine in daylight. The locals had a very different opinion of it at night. That road, you see, was lined on both sides with massive, ancient peepal trees. In Indian culture, the peepal is considered sacred. During the day, it's said to be inhabited by the divine, offering shade and oxygen to the living. But at night, the belief is that the gods leave. And the things that take their place are not gods. They are Vetalas, Yakshinis, spirits that do not mean you well. Rohan considered himself a rational man. He didn't believe in that stuff. So he turned onto the road. The change was immediate. The air dropped in temperature. The canopy closed overhead like a vault door, blocking out the moon entirely. His headlight cut this narrow, shaking beam of pale light into pure blackness, and the darkness on either side felt like it was leaning in. Halfway through, he saw something in the distance, hanging from a low branch of one of the larger trees, a shape. He slowed down as he approached, telling himself it was a bundle of rags, a plastic bag, something the wind had caught, except the wind wasn't blowing. The leaves were absolutely still. He passed underneath it. His engine sputtered. The headlight flickered, nearly died, and in that split second of almost darkness, something landed on the back of his seat with a violent, bone-jarring thud. The bike lurched sideways. He fought the handlebars, nearly going down. He expected to feel the dead weight of a fallen branch, maybe a monkey, startled from the tree. But the weight kept adjusting, settling, shifting its center of gravity the way only a living thing does when it sits down and gets comfortable. It felt exactly like a person sitting behind him. Rohan did not look in the rearview mirror. He is very clear about this. He was moving at 40 kilometers an hour through absolute darkness, and he did not look in that mirror. His brain, I think, knew that whatever was back there, he didn't want to see its face. Then the cold came, not wind cold, not night cold. This was a radiating coldness pressing against his back, soaking through the fabric of his jacket, touching his skin, and with it came a smell, wet ash and rotting marigolds. If you've ever been near a cremation ground after rainfall, you know that smell. It is completely unmistakable. And then the voice. It was dry, papery, and it wasn't coming from behind him. It felt like it was coming from inside his helmet, right at his ear. I know what you stole from your brother. Rohan nearly lost control of the bike. Years ago, he had taken money from his brother during a period of financial desperation. He had never told anyone, not a soul. He twisted the throttle to its limit. The bike screamed, and the thing on the back laughed. This dry, crumbling, crackling sound. Faster, Rohan. The faster you go, the tighter I hold. He could feel the suspension buckling under the added weight, the rear tire pressing hard into the asphalt. He shouted prayers. He shouted curses. He shouted anything to drown it out. And then, ahead, the orange glow of sodium streetlights. His neighborhood. He shot out of the tree line and skidded to a stop under a lamppost, ripping his helmet off. The weight was gone instantly. The suspension snapped back up like it had never been loaded. He spun around, nothing behind him, just the empty road dissolving back into the dark trees. But on the seat of his bike, in the thick layer of dust that had settled there over weeks of riding, were two distinct imprints, the shape of feet facing backward. Rohan pushed his motorcycle the rest of the way home rather than ride it. He has never taken that road again, but he says that sometimes, late at night, fan turning overhead, apartment quiet, he catches the smell of wet ash, and he hears that dry, crackling laughter coming from somewhere in the corner of the room. Our second story takes us to Varanasi, and I want to take a second here because Varanasi is not just a backdrop. It is central to understanding why something like this would happen there. Varanasi is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on Earth. Some historians date it back over 3,000 years, and at its heart is the Manikarnika Ghat, the great cremation ground, where fires have been burning without interruption 24 hours a day for centuries. The belief is that dying in Varanasi releases the soul from the cycle of rebirth entirely. It is considered the most sacred place to die in Hinduism, which also means it is a city that has accumulated more concentrated death, more unresolved spiritual energy than almost anywhere else on the planet. A young architecture student named Kabir came to Varanasi for his thesis project. He was documenting the ancient structures of the Ghats, the stone steps descending to the Ganges, and he was genuinely fascinated by the place. He loved the way life and death existed side by side there, without embarrassment, without walls between them. One evening, he wandered further down the riverbank than he'd been before, past the main burning ghats, past the tourists and the priests, to an older, more abandoned section the locals called the Ghost Ghat. It was crumbling, sinking slowly into the river, weeds pushing up through the stones. Kabir found a ruined shrine there, covered in intricate carvings that were centuries old, and he set up his tripod to take some long exposure shots as the light died. The mood was extraordinary. The sounds of the city had muffled away to almost nothing back there, just the water, just the wind. That's when he noticed the figure, a man sitting on the steps that led down to the river, perfectly still, back to Kabir. He was naked and covered in ash, which isn't unusual in Varanasi. Agori sadhus practice rituals involving ash and cremation grounds as part of their spiritual path. But Kabir registered in the back of his mind that something was wrong with the man's posture. The head was tilted too far, resting at that specific angle where it goes past peaceful and into something that sets off alarms in your gut. Kabir called out a polite greeting, asked if it was okay to photograph the shrine. Nothing. No response. No breath. No movement. He stepped closer. The smell reached him before anything else. Not incense, not river water. Something stagnant and thick. Sir? The head snapped upright, not gradually, not like a person waking from a doze. It snapped, like a mechanism engaging, and then slowly, the torso began to rotate toward him, but the legs didn't move. They stayed planted on the step, pointing at the river, while the upper body turned all the way around with this grinding, cracking sound, like green wood being twisted until it splits. The face that looked at him was wearing a human face, but nobody was home behind it. The jaw hung loose, and the eyes were absolutely lit up with something ancient and hungry and deeply, deeply amused. The voice that came out layered on itself, like multiple people speaking in unison from different distances. Do you have a riddle for me, boy? Or shall I give you one? Kabir fell backward over his tripod. The camera hit the stone steps and shattered. The thing stood up from the ghat in these horrible, jerky, disconnected movements, like a marionette being worked by someone who'd never done it before, and began to climb the stairs toward him. Not running, not rushing. It didn't need to rush, just that heavy, wet, rhythmic impact of dead weight on stone. Thud, thud, thud. Kabir ran. He scrambled through the mud along the bank, clawed his way up the embankment, and didn't stop until he hit the dense, crowded lanes near the Kashi Vishwanath temple. He collapsed against a tea stall, gasping, unable to form words. The tea seller looked at him for a moment, took in the state of him, quietly handed him a glass of water. "You went to the old ghat, didn't you?" Kabir nodded. The man sighed, the way you sigh about something that's been true your whole life. The Vetala waits for the curious. You are very lucky. It usually won't let someone leave without answering a question. Answer wrong, you die. Answer right, it lets you go. You didn't answer at all. That confused it long enough for you to run. Kabir left Varanasi the following morning. He never opened the files from his camera's memory card. He destroyed it. He said he already knew what he would see if he looked at those images, and he was not willing to see it. The part that haunts him most, he says, isn't the memory of that face. It's what came after. Now, years later, whenever he sees a dead body at a funeral, in a news report, anywhere, there's always this half second where he waits, bracing himself, for the head to snap upright, for the eyes to open and find him, for the voice. Do you have a riddle for me, boy? Our third and final story comes from rural Kerala, a state famous for its lush backwaters and coconut groves, but equally famous among those who know for a particularly potent tradition of folk sorcery and spirit work that stretches back further than recorded history. A woman named Ananya had come home for her grandmother's funeral. The ancestral home was a grand traditional wooden structure, centuries old, the kind built around an open central courtyard, the kind that holds the memory of every person who's ever lived and died inside it. The property sat in the middle of a thick grove of trees that pressed in close on all sides. The funeral rites were completed. The body had been cremated that morning. The family was exhausted in the way grief makes you exhausted, not just physically, but at the level of the soul. They slept on mats in the main hall, as tradition calls for, but Ananya couldn't sleep. The night heat was suffocating. Around 2 in the morning, she got up and made her way to the kitchen for water. The kitchen looked out over the backyard, the family well. The moon was full and very bright. Standing next to the well was her grandmother. Ananya dropped the glass. It hit the stone floor and exploded. She had watched her grandmother's body burn that morning. She had stood at the pyre. There was no ambiguity, no mistake, and yet, there she was, wearing the same white sari she'd been cremated in, standing by the well, perfectly still. The figure turned toward her. The face was her grandmother's face, but the eyes were wrong, glowing with this cold, pale, yellowish light, like phosphorescence on stagnant water. Ananya couldn't scream, couldn't speak. The figure raised one hand and beckoned her, "Come here." And against everything her instincts were screaming at her, she felt something else take over, a pull, a compulsion she couldn't name or resist. Her hands unlocked the back door. Her feet carried her outside into the humid night air. She was halfway to the well before she noticed it. The figure wasn't touching the grass. It was floating silently, about 3 inches above the ground. The voice that came from its mouth was nothing like her grandmother's voice. The old woman owed me a sacrifice. She died before the debt was paid. You carry her blood. You will pay it. Ananya tried to move her legs. They were concrete. She was completely locked. The entity reached out and wrapped its hand around her wrist. The cold was instantaneous and total, not like touching ice, but like the concept of warmth being deleted. And then the visions started flooding in. Ancient battlefields, entire villages dying, dark underground chambers where fire burned in colors that don't exist. She could feel it pressing against the edges of her consciousness, trying to push her out of her own mind, looking for room to climb inside. And then she remembered something her grandmother had told her when she was maybe 7 years old. Iron, the old woman had said. Spirits cannot stand iron. It burns them. It reminds them they are not alive. On Ananya's right wrist, the one the entity was gripping, she wore a heavy iron bangle, a kata. She twisted her hand, grinding the iron directly against the entity's skin. The sound it made was like water hitting a pan of scalding oil. A shriek tore through the night, sharp and wrong, not a human sound, and the grip released. The form that had been wearing her grandmother's face dissolved in seconds into a cloud of black moths that scattered upward into the coconut trees and were gone. The family came running. They found Ananya unconscious in the grass beside the well. When she woke, there was a handprint seared into her wrist. Not a burn exactly, more like frostbite. The tissue damaged by cold rather than heat. The family boarded up the back of the house. They don't speak about the dead. They don't know what it was or how old it is. Only that the thing in the trees is still there, still waiting, watching the well. Ananya never went back to Kerala. She says the only lingering symptom, if you can call it that, is waking up in the night with her hand freezing cold, right where those fingers closed around her wrist. So let's talk about what these things actually are. In Western terms, the Vetala gets compared to vampires, and I get why. The corpse, the predatory intelligence, the aversion to certain materials. But the comparison falls short. A vampire is fundamentally a creature of appetite. It wants blood. It wants to feed. The Vetala wants something far more unsettling. It wants to engage. It wants to talk. It wants to test you. The oldest and most detailed source on the Vetala is the Baital Pachisi, the 25 Tales of the Baital, a Sanskrit text that's over 1,000 years old. In it, a great king is tasked by a sorcerer with retrieving a Vetala that hangs from a tree in a cremation ground. The king must carry it on his back in silence. The Vetala draped across his shoulders, like a living corpse, tells him stories, and at the end of each one poses a riddle. If the king knows the answer and stays silent, his head will explode. If he speaks the answer aloud, the Vetala flies back to its tree, and the king has to start all over again. Think about what that tells you about the entity's psychology. It is not a predator in the conventional sense. It is something that has been suspended between worlds for so long, it has developed a taste for the complexity of the living mind. It is bored. It is curious. And it will absolutely destroy you, but it would rather play with you first. In tantric traditions, the Vetala is not purely a malevolent force. Certain practitioners deliberately sought encounters with them, believing that a Vetala who respected you could grant extraordinary power and hidden knowledge. This is why they're associated with the tantric arts. They are gatekeepers, ancient, neutral in a terrifying way, and utterly indifferent to human morality. Their association with the peepal tree is specific and consistent across regions, which is interesting in itself because folklore that's genuinely this geographically widespread usually has some experiential root. Skeptics have pointed out that the peepal's dense canopy can trap gases, or that wind through hollow trunks can generate infrasound, low frequency vibrations below the range of hearing that are well documented to cause feelings of dread, paranoia, and in some cases, visual disturbances. The cremation ground encounters, similarly, could involve the hallucinogenic properties of smoke from burning bodies and synthetic materials mixed with grief-induced delirium. Maybe. But those explanations don't account for the handprint burned into Ananya's wrist, which her family witnessed with their own eyes. They don't account for the backward footprints in the road dust on the back of Rohan's motorcycle seat. So I'll leave it there. Was it infrasound and grief and darkness playing tricks on people already primed to believe? Or is there something ancient and patient hanging upside down in the branches, waiting not to eat you, not to haunt you, but to ask you a question you are not prepared to answer? Let us know what you think in the comments, and if you've had an experience in India or anywhere else that you can't explain, share it below. We read every single one. Subscribe for more true stories from the shadows of Asia.